was. I don't know. There should be a better song for this. MPL After Hours. Just do Michael Jackson as the opener. Oh, if only. Welcome everybody, another episode of the MPL After Hours, episode 3. This time we're talking about everything that has happened not only within the week, because currently, when this video comes out, we're in the middle of the playoffs of the MPL MY Season 17, and we've already concluded MPL PH, and we've learned quite a lot of things. But before we get into any of that, once again, big congratulations to TLPH, one of my favorite teams of all time, and of course, Team Falcons. Again, great epic matchup here, but it's really building an awesome storyline coming into EWC. Now, I'm hoping that, SRG adds into that list. All the Ulfendar peeps, now known as Aurora Gaming, come all the way from Turkey, also joins Team Spirit as well. It'd be really awesome to get a lot of the EWC representatives that we got from the previous years, because that's just going to make this EWC even more epic. And not to mention, I'm pretty sure that EWC also has their title defense thing, which has been really awesome, because right now it's TLPH who's holding that title. And honestly, SRG was holding it the year before, so it was pretty awesome that the storyline is continuing to develop over these past 3 years. Now, let's talk a little Mobile Legends, right? Now, I'm sorry to all the viewers who are coming in and have no idea what Mobile Legends is. It's a simple 5v5 MOBA. This is a large part of my job. I shoutcast for this game consistently, if you don't know. And I want to talk about the meta specifically, because this upcoming playoffs for MPL MY has started to look a little interesting, only because the one thing that I've been raving is that we needed more options in the EXP lane, and finally they did it with Paquito. How they did it with Paquito is a simple change to his empowered abilities. Yes, they moved the numbers around, but the most important thing here, and to summarize it all up, is that yes, he has a little bit more base damage, but most importantly, he has damage reduction, like scaling damage reduction, which is insane, absolutely insane ability to have in the meta currently. Now, there's a couple of problems with the game again, this is all personal opinion. I think that these need to be addressed, but before we get into any of that, let's really understand what I'm talking about here, especially when we're talking about the meta. First off, what did we learn from MPL PH's Grand Finals, or at the very least throughout the regular season building up to the Grand Finals, right? We were already learning drafting patterns, especially from blue side. Red side got a little bit harder. Come playoffs, they have solutions for red and blue side, but it comes at a couple of costs. And I think that, I don't think that the meta has really shifted too far from what we know, with a couple of extra changes and new rules to the drafting patterns. Okay, so let's talk about Paquito, right? Paquito and Fove in the EXP lane, because these guys are disgusting. You can't have one without the other. If Paquito shows up, that means Fovius got banned. And Fovius already ruins a lot of the previous meta's capability to start not only snowballing, but find tempo in the middle of a team fight. It's a lot harder to get consistent tempo breaks against the Fovius, similarly to tempo breaking against Fredrin, for an example. A lot of mini stuns, a lot of ways to kind of cancel out your abilities, which could ruin the timings comboing with everybody else. Those are the main factors why Fovius is just so powerful. He's not exactly the greatest pre-level 4, but after level 4, he just always will feel like you're running through mud if you're trying to get past him, and fighting him feels like you're wasting a lot of time. Paquito, on the opposite side, is a little different. He's a little bit more early to mid-game centric, but as you get into the late game, you start to realize that now that they've altered his base numbers, and we've kind of figured out what the meta build for Paquito is, where it's a hybrid of high damage, good penetration to deal with heroes, but plenty, and especially since they had a lot of quality of life changes to Paquito prior to this update, clearing the wave has never been easier. You could even proxy the wave, which is even crazier. And even people thought Esme was the answer to Paquito, but it's not the answer at all. But Esme provides little to nothing in a team fight other than her falling star moon, and her builds, unfortunately for magic builders, not great. Not great. It's either you do 1,000,000 damage or you do no damage at all. There is no safe in between. You get what I'm saying? I think that Julian is probably the closest hybrid that we can probably get to, but Would you prefer a Julian, or would you prefer just having Uranus shredding MR? Is still hyper tanky and is still relevant with Thunderbelt if necessary. You can always go into your traditional traditional tankers up in the EXP, like Terizla, who kind of fulfills that build of providing just enough damage in the lane and a strong passive to sustain and hold out in the middle of team fights while still having engagement tools to try and get back into the fight. But he's more of sustain. He's not like Paquito. Paquito kind of has everything right now, which is why he's such a major problem in the current metagame. Because Paquito is that dangerous early on, his graph looks like, well, I should probably do it from this way. His graph looks like this. It's continuously just getting stronger, and then once you get to mid to late game, it stagnates. He doesn't go down, which is the big problem. His damage is always relevant, and that's the scary part. Playing white Yishinshin in the jungle or even in the gold lane just feels like, oh my god, if he flickers on me, I die. And there's not a lot of answers to it. You just get one shot. There's just nothing you can do about that, right? Obviously, there are some more minute details that we need to talk about, like the second item problem for Paquito, right? It's very situational, but that's what gives him the most amount of flexibility. Malefic Roar has been my personal favorite, mainly because I just like one-shotting people and not giving them a chance to play a very oppressive, dominating playstyle, and that's me. But based on professional play with Quantum Charge as well, not taking Lethal Ignition, they opt to go for something else. If it's a bad matchup, like Esme for an example, you can see that Samford opts to go for after he finishes up his Hunter Strike, and sometimes, if he doesn't get the proxy down, he might instantly go first item Sea Halberd. And I think it's interesting, right? It's really interesting that Paquito now is so OP that he honestly deserves a ban, but Fulvius is just too much of a problem to ignore. So we can't really do much about this, and that's just the EXP lane, right? Let's talk about Claude, because Gold Lane has been very interesting based on how the drafting patterns have worked. Now, there's Carry, Obsidia, and Harith. These are the three major players when we start talking about Claude. Obviously, there's a little bit more of a 50-50 between Moskov and Claude, but that boils down to the emblems more than anything else. They kind of scale roughly the same, and arguably Claude has a better late game because of his ult. Either ways, we still have answers, right? We saw that Claude generally started to struggle against people who either A, outscale him, or B, are able to kind of sustain through that initial burst, right? The initial burst being the Blazing Duet. Most of these marksmen's solutions is to wait until the very end of the game and then finally get a Winds of Nature, or they get Winds of Nature as their fourth item, skipping over the Malefic Gun. And that has its pros and cons, right? It's really up to the professional player, and it's tough. I think that there's too many relationships in the draft to say that any one of these are good. What I can confidently say, Paquito is just good in general. Claude, just good in general. Harith, really good in general. Although you want to kind of diversify your damage between magic and as well as physical, there's still more things to think about, like the mid lane, right? Again, I've mentioned the things that outscale. Why do we need all these outscalers? It's because we can't play the traditional artillery mage. I was thinking of a better way to kind of summarize these types of mages, but essentially an artillery mage is somebody who shoots from so far away, you don't even see the physical body, you just see the skill shots. I'm talking about your Novarias, your Yeeves, your Farsas. All of them really struggled because the previous EXP lane matchup definitely came into play. People who could disrupt these types of attacks. Farsa is notorious for getting canceled out by Cho, by the Grox, by Yuzong, by Paquito even, to Rizlas. We've seen many different answers to that problem. Yve, now that they've made sure that her RWM, her real world manipulation, or her ult for those who are just, new to the game, Yve has CC immunity when she ults, which is great. However, when she does get hit, but well, I say CC immunity. It's more like how do I explain this? It's you don't stop the animation per se, okay? You can't cancel the RWM, but you can slow down the shots. As the RWM expands and you get your box, you have to start tapping away at each of the individual boxes that you want to trigger it, right? If you get stunned, you won't be able to trigger shit for the duration of that stun, which means that you have lost DPS and downtime in getting an effective ult. Now, this works in a couple of ways, right? If somebody decides to engage where the RWM is unleashed, that means you're most likely trying to save people from taking too much damage by getting in and out of the RWM. And that's the big problem. It's access denial. And that's the main idea for a lot of these artillery style mages. I would even argue that even, Zushin, Zetian are sort of in that category. I would say that Zetian more so. Zushin is more of a peeler. Her job is very simple: win her lane, win the 2v2s, immediately start expanding her influence across the map. They try to get on top of you, you throw them away. If they're trying to run away, you pull them back in. Works very, very similarly to Phoveus. She makes you feel like you're running through mud. And that's the main idea. No matter what, you need to provide at least some kind of solutions to the major scalers. And right now, we're leaning to a very peel-focused style. I don't particularly like that, and obviously MPL PH has kind of shown us the late side and the early side with both TL, PH, and as well as Falcons in that grand finals. I think that was the best example of what the meta has to offer us as of yet. Now, a couple of things we did learn is that the mid lane 2v2s are so important. And the worst part is that not only do we have to think about the 2v2 in the mid lane as a coach and an analyst, you also have to think about the things that kind of answer those in the later stages of the game. There is short sight, which is the laning phase, and then there is the looking into the future, which is late game. In both scenarios, right, if I end up Eve into Claude, there's a very high chance that I'm going to lose this game. Only because Claude is able to get on top of Eve, and once Eve is in that RWM, she can't really do too much. And that's a big problem with artillery mages if you're able to close the distance. That's why I think that Claude right now, as well as Harith, are one of the few heroes in the gold lane right now that just feels unbeatable given the circumstance of how many other things you have to worry about in the draft. Now, it doesn't mean that this is what the meta is going to be. It is a continuously evolving thing. So let's go into it one by one. Now, before I go even further, actually, I forgot to talk about supports. I'm sorry, supports, that I forgot about you, but let's talk about concussive blast users, because that's kind of the only thing keeping Zushin within the meta. I think that if there are faster wave clears, that Zushin probably won't be as much of a problem, but that's because right now we've got a lot of supports that can clear waves fast early on into the game because of the passive use of concussive blast. Atlas has come back into the meta, which is interesting because I would never think that Atlas would ever come into the meta as long as Purify is an ability, as a battle spell, right? It's just walk away from the CC, you take away Atlas's biggest plus point, and actually you get a 2-for-1. You get his ult and his flicker like 90% of the time when you have that flicker anyways. If you get caught by the ult by itself, then maybe you have some issues that you got to figure out with your positioning. That is besides the point. Atlas happens to be really good into Zushin, mainly because he can reset the number of butterflies as he splits apart, meaning that he actually spends more time taking damage from Zushin, and because of the way that his passive works, when he splits from his armor, from the little squid boy, he takes reduced damage anyway, and that's an incredibly important number or stat to have. I'm going to talk about damage reduction and true damage much later on after we kind of cover up the meta and what some of my, I don't want to say predictions, but this is what I'm trying to foresee, at least with the direction of where the meta might lead into prior to any patches that come up, because knowing how a lot of international tournaments, we always have that one patch that completely ruins everybody and resets everybody back to zero. So assuming that we don't get a huge patch and it's only just small changes up until that international, here's what I'm expecting, right? Special mentions to also Lo Yi and as well as Lilia. Both of these mid, they aren't the best, but they provide something that right now the other meta mid laners don't. And again, Lilia is more oppressive, very much zone control. Lo Yi gives you a huge macro advantage against your opponents. Fast rotations, you can make blind calls even. I mean, obviously everybody's going to be looking at Sanji's plays on this Lo Yi, but at the end of the day, it's a pocket pick. Not everybody has that type of instinct. Not everybody has those types of mechanics in and outside of lane. Because I've seen a lot of Lo Yis be good in team fights, but suck during the laning phase. Others who are amazing at the laning phase, but don't know what to do with their ult and end up not using it off of cooldown, which is very frustrating. Either ways, this really boils down to the 2v2s. What I'm talking about is the mid and your supports. Obviously, the special mentions really impact these styles of 2v2s, and they provide their own pros and cons, but supports are now required to do a little bit more than just say, I need to be at the right place at the right time. They now are required to have much better understanding on hero matchups in every scenario. Now, let me paint you a picture. Let's set 3 scenarios. There is neutral objective fights. These could be turtles, these could be lords. The second scenario is your lane. 2v2 right at level 1. And let's say you end up in a 3v3 scenario. The most common scenario that we see in these 3v3s is pre-level 4 at Lethal Wanderer, where both junglers want to get a bit of an EXP advantage to hit level 4 just that much quicker, right? Without having to take a full camp on your side of the map. In all of those situations, your supports need to be thinking about, hey, in the 2v2, where do I need to position myself in the lane? Some matchups, again, some matchups are way more complicated. Like the Lilia matchup is very, very complicated, especially if it's like Lilia Kalia versus Zushin and Khalid, for example. High damage, but a decent amount of sustain, and a mid laner who can basically fight forever as long as she has mana and she's hitting abilities, right? Those situations differ very differently compared to the 3v3s when you're fighting for Lethal Wanderer. Now you have to start judging every single time a new factor comes into play. What can I do to either cancel abilities, get the job done, or stay in line with the main focus? For turtle fights, you're looking to zone out the jungler. Sometimes you actually have to zone out the EXP if the EXP has so much of an advantage that it's threatening your gold laner or jungler. So those are the moments that roamers really make the difference. And I think that it is an underrated role because it's not the flashiest. Now that Atlas comes in, it might be a little bit flashier to be fair, but for the most part, you have to be intelligent with what you are doing. And I think your mechanics also will reflect that, but the intelligence is something you can't take away from a player, which is why I think that JP, again, most people are, they don't see his impact, but they do see him survive at 1 HP. Wonder why, right? It's like he's got brains or something. Crazy. Daddy JP does it again. Now, instead of glazing TLPH, I also want to talk about MPL MY and some of the things that, again, a lot of the information that I'm presenting to you here is after watching, casting the very first day, watching the second day of MPL MY play-ins, playoffs, play-ins, and then playoffs, and then finally MPL PH, what we learned from their entire playoffs, right? I think for MPL MY, Paquito is definitely confirmed. Every EXP laner has wanted to play this high damage, all-encompassing, all the tools in your toolbox. I have a dash, I have a shield, I have damage reduction, I have crowd control. Paquito has everything. For those who played League, he is the Cassante of the EXP. He's just disgusting. He literally has everything that you could ever want in your top laner, right? That's what Paquito EXP is right now, or represents itself in the meta. I think that it probably deserves a ban if you are on red side, but there's just so many good picks and certain players who are particularly good at certain meta options that's just not possible. You'd rather just get rid of the Phoveus and pray that the opposing EXP laner sucks. That's kind of what you have to do, right? If Paquito makes a mistake, he dies. There's very small room of error. Pretty similar to Phoveus, but at least Phoveus is tanky enough to kind of, buffer the mistakes. The next thing that I think is going to be interesting for MPL MY, I think that YSS with a strong mid duo is probably the only time that Yi Shin is going to come out. I don't think we're going to get a gold lane Yi Shin ever anymore. It's not a matter of can our players have the mechanical capabilities to do the Yi Shin thing. I think it's very easy to play Yi Shin, right? It's literally you learn one mechanic on this hero and you've basically mastered the hero, right? It's switching between the melee and the sword and the bow, basically. Melee and range. You just have to interchange it constantly. That's all you have to do. And then you get mega damage because of it. It's a simple mechanic with a very high ceiling. Unfortunately, we've tried this during the regular season. It did not work. Most players can't deal with it. We don't have somebody who's at a Kelra level. Well, I think the only one would probably be Innocent, but he can play anything in MPL MY and get away with it, if I'm being perfectly honest. Essentially, I don't see Yi Shin really coming back in other than just in the jungle. That's kind of it. I don't see it going into the gold lane for MPL MY specifically, because this really directly impacts the mid-duo draft picks, right? Unless we are using Yi Shin as a potential flex pick here. Ooh. Flex pick as in something that can be put into multiple roles when revealed in the draft. Yi Shin can go into the jungle, can go into the gold lane. Another simple example of this would probably be... oh man, I could not think of one off the top of my head. Dear God. Oh, wait, no. We also have simple things like our support Guinevere. That's another pretty simple one. Wow, it took me so long to get to that one. Why did I waste on that? I wasted 2 minutes thinking about that. Jesus. All right. Besides that, Here are my low likeliness for MPL MY playoffs and the high likeliness. Things that are less likely to happen, I call it low likeliness. Things that are highly likely to happen means like, yes, I think this is going to happen almost guaranteed. First things first. Yishin jungle, too many factors in the other lanes. Yeah, I might be shown if there is like a strong side lane and a even mid duo, or maybe you have like an even side lane and a strong mid duo. I think the best iteration of it is a strong mid duo and then a side laner who can go 50-50. I'd rather that. And that's personal opinion. Most professional players might lean the opposite way or either or. That's up to you. I don't care. High likeliness things that are happening in MPL MY for this playoffs. Pack Fove. They are high impact EXP laners that demand way too much attention. And that's the problem. How do we deal with this? I feel like there's no direct answer to this that wouldn't cost you like a game. I'm thinking of Ruby. Ruby might be like the direct answer to Pack. Pack has like a high amount of damage in the laning phase, he cycles around cooldowns, and as long as you're pushing buttons, you're going to get damage out, you're going to clear waves faster. That's just a guarantee. You need to out-sustain him though. You need to not only either A, out-damage him, or B, out-sustain him, or C, keep him in the fight long enough to get your damage and still have a means of escape. Because there's a 7-second window here. In the early game, depending on what your emblem setup is going to be, generally speaking, it's 7 to 8 seconds for your cooldowns, right? For each of the abilities, except for obviously when you get your empowered Paquito stuff. Honestly, I should just make this entire video about Paquito. I love Paquito, but also I've spent way too much time deep diving into what makes Paquito particularly good. Honestly, I should have made a video about that. But I think most people understand how Paquito works, right? It's a fan favorite for a reason. Unfortunately, Esme is just not good enough. She doesn't do anything. You're probably thinking like, oh yeah, he generates a shield, right, with that heavy left hand. He has to use the heavy left hand at some point to get to that three ability cast usages to get the free cast. And it doesn't work. It really doesn't. If you proxy the wave at level 1 and just focus on getting level 2, you will win that trade out. Eventually, Esme will outscale you, but you will always move out of the lane first. You will always clear faster than Esme. You will always provide more impact in a team fight compared to Esme. Esme wants to peel. Paquito has multiple options. Paquito is allowed to not only peel, but also initiate fights because of his toolkit. Fredrin. That could be another potential way to shut him down. I remember a particular game pre-pack buff that Fredrin was a pretty good way to kind of keep him in the lane. Because technically, Fredrin will never die in the lane unless you catch him at level 1. And by the time he hits level 4, that's when he completely outscales Paquito. So unless Paquito is winning the lane from the get-go, I think that Fredrin might be one of the few tank sandbags that can go toe-to-toe against him while still being relevant. I also think that anybody who decides to sandbag the Paquito needs to start taking concussive blast early on and don't really interact with the Paquito, just to make sure that in case the lane proxies happen, you can instantly respond with your own proxy and kind of keep up with tempo against the pack. That's generally my advice against him. That, and also maybe just get Fove and win the game outright. Now, the next high likeliness thing is going to be Kalia Gatot. We've already seen a little bit of it, but I already made the prediction a little bit earlier, and that is because the gold lane is too important. Gold lane matchups can come down to just battle spells, right? If somebody has Flicker and compared to somebody who has Purify, that gives you an advantage outright. Well, in certain matches, obviously it doesn't, but like for the most part, for gold laners, having Flicker is a good way to get out of bad situations. Same goes for Purify. Purify is on a shorter cooldown, but Flicker gets you out of more situations compared to Purify. And that's the thing. With Kalia, you're forcing your opponent to take the Purify straight away. Same goes for the Cho. Gatot and arguably Atlas. I would say that Atlas, much bigger reason to take the Purify, but Gatot as a means to deal with both Atlas and as well as Kalia. Kalia is able to kind of sustain but single target. Atlas, hyper tanky, can't really sustain, but is able to make huge engagements. Both of which follow the same logic. Kalia can displace, Atlas can displace. One is AoE, the other is single target. Gatot counters both of them. And Gatot does it in a really good way. Not only can he sustain the damage from both in these 2v2s, he can sandbag the mid wave, making the 2v2 just non-existent. We don't really fight each other. If I have Yves Gatot versus your Zushin and Kalia, there's a pretty good chance that I'm going to be walking away with more HP, because we're going to clear the wave, you're going to try and heal off the wave. By then, I've made my way to the top side or the bottom side of the map. You need to be able to keep control over that mid lane, and Gatot is a great way of doing it. Atlas and Kalia have already been shown. We're going to see a lot more Gatot for sure. For sure. It directly affects the 2v2, deters gold laners from taking flicker, and oh yeah, of course, artillery mages. Artillery mages always suffer. I would argue even Harith suffers because of that Zaman force. Unfortunately, you have to like touch the Zaman force, just touch it, not even completely cross it, to get a reset on your chrono dash. So it's a good way to be like, hey, you gotta hold on to your ability, you better get out of the Zaman force zone, you can jump back in afterwards, but like for the most part, I might catch you, so like zone you out. Finally, we start talking about the problems that I think teams are facing to trying to figure out the meta. I've already elaborated like a lot of big points, like Paquito for an example, but here's where I think the problems are going to start emerging. I think that right now Paquito is too overtuned. He's way too overtuned. I think that and there's a couple of reasons for it, right? I think obviously changing the cooldown rate isn't that big of a deal. Generally speaking, with the new item changes, like if Queen's Wings, for an example, is already pretty insane on Paquito to create outplays in the middle of a fight when honestly you don't deserve. Sometimes Paquitos don't deserve that extra leg, and I think that it comes down to the two main stats: damage reduction and true damage, which has always been a bit of a weird problem to have because the math never made sense. True damage is just something that completely ignores everything. And in some titles, the way around it is damage reduction and shielding. Oh, you can if you're hitting the red health bar, you're getting the true damage. No armor, no magic resist will protect you from that, except for damage reduction. That's the only thing. Main stats, you can have as much armor as you want, but if I have true damage, none of that matters. If you don't have damage reduction, none of that matters. I'll cut right through you like butter. Damage reduction, generally speaking, is a little too good as well. I feel like because damage reduction covers everything, right? You have something that counters completely everything and the other that completely counters everything as well. And these two stats are creating huge problems because it now makes the late game kind of unwinnable for a lot of people. You know, like how do you deal with carry and 3 tanks? We saw that yesterday during the playoffs. There's literally no answer to that. And even pretty similarly to the Falcons' near comeback against TLPH. Again, Super Marco decided to go, hey, we got the carry on our side. We're gonna first pick the Fredrin because they're too scared to know what exactly is gonna show up in the gold lane. And if they want to win that gold lane so bad, they can take care of it for themselves. It doesn't matter. We still have answers, right? Most of the time, that just boils down to, hey, I get access to Harith, I just one-shot you. Damage is too high. That's another problem I'll get into a different day, but I think that Harith overall is getting too many benefits from things outside of his kit, which is a little weird, but then again, I think that the kit kind of adds on to that, multiplicative effect. What else? Oh, yes, mid variety. There's not a lot of mid variety, I have to admit. And when I talk about variety, I'm talking about different styles of play. Just notice that there's a lot of categories that casters give to a majority of the heroes in the game to kind of group them up because they all try to do the same purpose in their own different ways. It's the micro mechanics that matter later down the line about how certain interactions work with each other, and you maybe could take advantage of that, but right now, there's just no one-stop shop solution other than Zushin because she's just too good in lane. There's no real way to deal with it. And I think that pocket picks might show up more in the mid lane this particular season, building up into EWC until we see another patch. I think the Loyis, the Valiers, and the Valentinas are very, very good. The Valiers, I'm kind of like 50-50 on. Sometimes he's great, sometimes he's awful. Really depends on the player. But in most situations, I think that the Valentina actually is a pretty good way to deal with some of the things that have been presented in the meta. Paquito is rather interesting because, again, he's only got Knockout Strike, which doesn't make a lot of sense without the rest of his kit. And Valentina can't take advantage of that. But her Shadow Strikes, very, very good. That fear. She's unique because she has not only mobility, but has a means to kind of control melee heroes, right? I can stop you for literally 1 second, back away from the fight, and then pray that you don't have flicker. And those small moments in professional play get you wins. Now we go over to our next problem. Map openers. We don't have good map openers. Atlas, particularly good at kind of opening the map, sucks at getting out of it. You lose your flicker, and then you lose so much more. It's difficult because that's why I think Zushin kind of like is super meta, because she's one of the few heroes that's like, oh, unless you're really snowballing out of control, you're not going to one-shot me as long as I have my ult. I'm able to displace myself and have a massive shield on top of that. So there needs to be a way to open up the map a little more safely. I don't know if they're going to implement vision wards or something that you have to buy, or something that you have to fight over to like get something that you can drop down and get permanent vision over the map. Well, maybe not permanent, limited vision, limited vision, assuming that will stay the entire game, assuming that no one spots it and nobody breaks it, That's what I'm talking. Like, there's got to be some counterplay. People need to be able to like walk up and break it. That's all I'm asking for. Some way to open up the map more effectively than what rather than the tools that we have right now. We need more tools, is what I'm trying to say. We need more tools to open up the map, or at least we need balancing to kind of recuperate where everybody needs to have enough base health to not get one shot just for checking a bush. I think, obviously, things like Saber, can't really go around that. That's kind of his whole shtick. That's fine with me. I just think that not every hero should have that capability. Now, we talk about the gold lane. Oh, Harith, Claude, so safe. Everything just feels very situational besides the Harith and Claude and Harith. Like, everything else requires a setup. Or there has to be like a dedicated reason. Moskov, for an example, really good against like assassins, or generally speaking, he's not that bad against tanks as well, especially in the ultra late game where he's able to just kite around them forever. But that's the thing, you got to kite around them forever, like forever, ever. Like, it takes so long to get people down until you have that Trinity build. Harith, a little bit easier, able to just kite around people. We saw Chiku guys literally run circles around their opponents, so short cooldown, Harith, such fun, balanced goal laner. Finally, to wrap this all up, I've talked about everything that I wanted to say about the current metagame. Yes, it's a little bit jumbled. Yes, it's a little bit like all jumbled and not exactly the most organized. My thoughts weren't exactly the most organized, but hey, you get the general idea of what the meta is starting to shape up to be. Yeah, we need to address the damage reduction and true damage policies. We got to fight for that, people, because it is too much. It is ridiculous, and there is not enough counterplay around these two mechanics in the game. I would hope that there is, because there's only two solutions to this, right? Either you increase the amount of ways to get damage reduction, or you decrease the scalability of true damage. Maybe like true damage only applies to 50% of your attack damage. Oh, how about that? 50% of it is going to be true damage, 50% of it you could potentially survive. There's just so many ways to be able to bypass people's tank armor that like you don't have that second to kind of figure out what's going on. And at professional play, there's even less time to react, even though we're going into fractions of seconds, even to frame data, honestly, just to make sure that we get certain things done. Either ways, this is my look at the current meta as of right now. Good luck to all of our teams here at MPL MY. I really hope that you guys do put on a good show and get ready for EWC, because that's what I'm excited for. Who are the two people going over into Paris, baby? That's where it gets exciting. Good luck to all of our teams with MPL PH. Big shout outs to MPL Indonesia. They're going to have their playoffs soon. And once again, congratulations to TLPH as well as Team Falcons. We'll see you guys in Paris. See you then, boys.